debate of the work culture debates. Welcome in, whether you are joining us live or you're joining the recording. We're going to introduce ourselves. David, you're up first.
Oh, I'm up first. Thanks for tuning in. My name is David Shar from Illuminate PMC. Brittany said that I can't give you my whole bio. So all I will tell you is that I help organizations with their leadership and culture and burnout prevention. And I do all of that through keynote speaking, corporate training, and consulting.
Deborah.
Great
Who's next?
job.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, hi everyone. I'm Deborah Collazo from San Juan, Puerto Rico. Welcome everyone. I help small and medium businesses to remove barriers related to culture, structure, and human resource management so that they can grow effectively.
Shannel, you're
Brittany.
up.
Is that me?
Oh, is it Shannel or Brittany?
Deborah, look, your intro was fantastic. I am Shannel Winslow. I help organizations become more sustainable through ensuring that change is not just expected, but also well managed. It's interesting to me that, organizations, are always surprised by change. So let's create a culture where change is expected. And that's what I do.
And I'm Britni Eisenmann with Stoke Fire. I help organizations in leadership executive transition identify exactly where their gaps are so that their incoming executive doesn't have to burn time and resources getting acclimated.
Ooh, somebody rehearsed.
Yeah.
Not nice. Deborah, what are we debating today?
Well, we are in the first ever work culture debates, and we are debating, is there a right way to lay people off? So let's begin. Is
Awesome.
there a right way to lay people off?
David, you want to give us our first question?
Well, I think that there is a better way to lay people off. There are certainly wrong ways to lay people off. Um, and then there are better ways to lay people off. I don't know that layoffs are 100% avoidable all of the time, but I think that they could be conducted in ways that are respectful and that actually maintain the relationships with your employees who you're laying off and your employees who are staying, as opposed to the wrong way where you burn all of those bridges, even with the people who you don't kick out the door.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Me?
I think that for sorry, Brittany, to cut you off. I think that right is relative, right? I think that you're not going to realize whether or not you did it the right way, or you may not feel as though you did it the right way until further in the future. There is absolutely the wrong way to do it, right? And to your point, David, I think that the right way is assessed by the way that you show up, how your employees feel, how productive they are for the folks that are staying, and also the ability to retain or bring those folks back that were impacted by a layoff. Right. I have talked to people that have been laid off where they're just like, yeah, I'm hurt because you are impacting my ability to protect and provide for my family. But the way the organization did it, right, I don't hold a grudge towards the organization. I am upset, but the way that my manager showed up, or the way that the CEO showed up, or the way that they took care of us and provided and ensured that we were able to continue to provide for our family for whatever amount of time, was the right way for them.
Shannel, you touched on measurement and what you measure during the layoffs. I think Intel is one of the organizations that did this the best. When they were getting beat in the markets a couple decades ago, they decided to use one metric to determine if how they did their layoffs was successful. And that metric was how many of the people that they laid off had immediately another job. They knew where they were going from the
That's right.
moment that they were laid off by Intel. So they decided not just do we have to do this, they had to, scale down their offerings because they were being beat out in a couple markets. So they did have some runway. They knew it was coming. They didn't just tell people the day of, hey, you're going to be let go. They gave themselves a runway and all their employees. And at the same time, when they let their employees know you're being laid off, instead of all those people running out the door, they said,
Mhm.
here's what you get before it actually happens. And part of that was extensive work landing your next position.
Yeah.
I've heard that most. So in the best practices of layoffs, especially bigger layoffs, one of the best things that it is always suggested is for you to have, even if you're a small company or a big company, to have that transition period be with the help of recruiters and people that specialize on getting people new jobs, right? So headhunters, they can meet with the people that are leaving. What are your qualifications? What do you want for your next job? Let's keep your career moving in a direction that you feel comfortable with, and help them make that transition from this is your layoff. Maybe you have 2 months, maybe you have five. I've seen companies that give 5 months of severance pay to
Mhm.
get ready for this. And usually, about like 2 to 5 months is more than enough to find your new job. And especially if you have help, and especially if you use the company's network to place certain employees in certain positions. So I think that's a great best practice to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. And you will have boomerang employees. Like in 6 months, whatever caused your layoff could absolutely turn around or even less. And you are going to have to go back to, especially some of the deep SMEs, and ask them to come back. And how you treated them in that moment or right leading up to their layoff determines whether they're going to be willing to come back to you or not, or if that's just lost to you forever.
So I agree. That's a happy path. Like I'm gonna play. Now I'm not saying I disagree. I'm just saying that's a happy path, right? Because headhunters cost money, right? Like
That's
these
true.
bringing in additional resources to help plant people that you are laying off into another organization, another role, another career, right? Takes time, takes money, and
Mm-hmm.
organizations are trying to save money,
Yeah.
right? So how do you do it both? How do you take care of your resources, right? Take care of the folks that you are laying off, help them plant a position, but also meet the demands of shareholders, board of directors, whatever the case may be when it comes to cost savings. So at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do from a layoff perspective.
Yeah. But isn't that sort of like the short term expense for a long term gain? But I'll one up it and also say, I'm not saying what it sounds like I'm saying, but here's the deal. We now live in a world that's post great resignation, post quiet quitting. There's no loyalty. When an employee finds a better job, they go and take that better job, and they don't care often whether they're leaving you in the lurch, and sometimes it will cost the organization a lot of money. So is this idea that layoffs are this monstrous thing, is this a relic to the days where loyalty existed both ways? Now, if
Oh,
it
good
doesn't
question.
exist from employee to corporation, does it have to? Ethically, is it imperative for it to exist from the corporation to the employee?
And we
And
could talk
that's
about
our show.
I
You
do
gave us
think
a
there's
lot to think
everything
about,
though in
David.
the organization. There are those employees that are extremely loyal, and there are those employees who are not. And that will define the perception of the employees that leave, but also we have to remember that it's going to impact the perception of the employees that stay. And so how you treat the ones that leave, even if they're not as loyal, right? But we can't really measure that. Like, it's hard to measure that when you're doing massive layoffs, right? So just doing the right thing at this point is also something that's going to pay for itself in the future, because of the productivity and effectivity of the people that do stay. So how you treat them, let's say it's not headhunters, let's say it's something else. It's severance pay, it's doing it in a humane way, sitting down with the employee, but not just sitting down like a random person sitting down with a random employee who they've never met, but can it be the supervisor to sit down, explain the situation, say this is not what we wanted, but this is how it ended up happening. This is what these are your
Mhm.
options, and this is your time frame, right? Like, can it be done in a humane way? Because it's not only going to affect the people that leave, but it's also going to affect the people that stay. And that perception is important to think about from when you're even thinking about starting a massive layoff.
Yeah.
Right.
And David, I think I disagree with you. I think loyalty still exists. Here's where I am. The psychological agreement has changed. So what loyalty looks like is different. It used to be, I will break my back and give you my time, and you'll give me a paycheck and maybe some days off, and that was how it was set. That shattered late aughts, definitely went away through the pandemic. Gen Z will be loyal to you. So the oldest of Gen Z are like turning 27 this year. They will be loyal to you if you give them safety, physical safety in the workplace, and financial stability. If you're letting them see how your organization is going to stay invested in the community, invested on planet Earth, not crumbling to pieces and burning up, invested in them, invested in social initiatives, they will be loyal to you. They're not going to be, it's not going to look the same because they're not willing to break their back just for pay. You have got to care about people and the world, and they will be loyal to you. They will stay there. So I think that the psychological contract has absolutely shifted, and now I think it unfroze for a while while it was crumbling, and I think it is refreezing with Gen Z. Now, Gen X and millennials, we're still not going to be loyal to you. We're going to get what we need, and then we're going to move on so that we can make more money because we couldn't at the beginning of our careers. But Gen Z, absolutely. I think we're going to see loyalty come back.
Well, I think that organizations who think that, people are going to stay for 5, 10, 15 years are living in the past, right? Mm-hmm. I think, again, it's about, and my little change management heart, it's how do we prepare for a workforce that wants to consistently be challenged, that, have other motivational factors outside of a paycheck. And if that is, outside of our organization, how do we strengthen that bridge so that we have a network of individuals who may or may not want to come back, right? Or if so, we have a way of partnering and engaging the organization that they work in. I think that yes. There is the grassroots responsibility of supervisors, managers, middle management, directors, VPs, and all the way up to CEOs that have to understand what motivates their workforce. Right. And they have to come to grips that sometimes your values as an organization doesn't align with the people on the ground. That's okay. And that relationship has to go. Yep. To your point about, I think I just lost my daggone point. But I think Deborah, you made a fantastic point earlier, and I'm going to get back to it, but I completely lost it. I completely lost it.
Was it about making like that process more humane? Was it?
Yeah, like it is about. See, you are so good at this. It is about making the process more humane. But let me get back to my thought. I lost it.
Okay. Let's do a viewer question. Okay, you can submit questions before we go live, and one of them was,
you could also submit them live right now, by the way, in the LinkedIn chat as well.
Yes. Ahead of time, we had submitted, should laid off employees accept offers to come back and work for the organizations as consultants or freelancers or contractors?
Heck yes.
What? Why?
Let me tell you.
Pay more probably.
Sometimes, maybe from a standpoint of a layoff or it happens because you actually left, but there is still a skill set need there, right? Especially if organizations are doing layoff poorly, where they're just making decisions based off the amount of money someone is making, or they are truly just trying to cut costs across the organization. So they're looking at a salary-based layoff versus doing like future state planning and seeing what they actually need for the organization. We can talk about that in a minute. But if you are laying people off, and then as a laid off employee, you have a skill set that the organization needs, you better go back and make your money, because now you have something that they need to actually pay for their company to sustain, for their business to sustain. So for me, I absolutely think from a gig economy, from where we are, where we have people that are, consultants or contractors that have a special skill set, we all know about that. Why not? Why not go back to the organization and put your services out there?
But know your rights, especially if you're re-entering the same organization with the same dynamics. There could be this erosion where suddenly they're expecting you to be at certain places at a certain time. You weren't coming to the meetings, etc. You need to know your rights as a contractor. And also, if they're trying to bring you back, make sure you're charging them more than you did as an employee, because now you got to
Yes,
pay taxes
there's
on that.
yeah, there's a couple of things I would love to say for that because of a personal experience, but also things I've seen in organizations. When you come back as a contractor or as a consultant, right? You do need to establish new boundaries regarding what you're going to offer and what that relationship is going to look like. Because as David says, it's really easy to backslide into, yeah, you have a different type of contract with us or a different type of relationship with us, but we expect you to do the same things.
Mm-mm.
No. Like it has to be different, and there has to be a contract that is like that states your different services that you're going to offer, where you're going to start, where you're going to end. Like you set your own schedule and stuff like that. I think that's a very great point, David.
And
Absolutely.
from the employer's perspective, this is why you treat your people nice, because otherwise they're not coming back, right? If, we saw this dichotomy between all these different organizations that were laying people off, with some
Mm-hmm.
organizations where the CEO was taking a pay cut and others where they were attending Sting concerts at Davos, like the night before they laid everybody off, right? So you got to think about that before you're laying people off, before you have to then call them to come back.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Chanel, can you talk to us a little bit more about how layoffs, like how should companies prepare for layoffs, like through the lens of organizational change, like change management? Can you like talk us through a little bit? Because you did say something really great before when we were talking about like human resource planning and just seeing what's up ahead and kind of like doing more in the future forecasting than just being reactive.
Yeah, I think that when we are moving through and having to have these thoughts of layoffs, right? Or decisions around, even if you're changing around your organization, it doesn't necessarily relate to a layoff. It has to be from a standpoint of strategic workforce planning. So if we're looking at any type of organization that wants to be able to conduct a future state, I will say scenario planning effort, you have to bake that into your actual model. So first and foremost, you need to look at how do you align your business strategy with workforce planning kind of concepts, right? How does those outcomes tie in? How do they align from talent and business, right? Then you have to kind of look at what roles that are imperative, what roles are priority for you to be able to fulfill your business objectives. Not every role is created equal, and so I think that people, from a standpoint, look at this effort as the people in the roles versus the roles themselves. This is agnostic of named resources. Then you want to look at, okay, what is happening in the organization? I'm sorry, what is happening external to the organization? So you want to do like your pestle, your external scans. You want to take a look at kind of what are these things that could truly honestly impact my business strategy, or me being able to align my business strategy. Then you want to look at conducting your current state. So people look at kind of current state analysis as this arduous thing, and it is, but it's so imperative to being able to align your current state with where you're trying to go. Then you're also looking at what type of scenarios could impact my actual ability to achieve my business outcomes. Then we're doing scenario based planning. And through those scenario based planning, I'm able to identify what could potentially happen in the future that could impact my processes, my technology, but most importantly, my people. And then you're able to identify whether or not through those scenario based plannings, some type of mitigation activities or strategies that are able to help kind of temper some of the decisions that you may have to make to your workforce. So for example, if we were looking at the pandemic, and again, I'm not going to knock the people that were in the room that had to make these very, very difficult choices, but in a lot of cases, people only saw the demand that was in front of them, but they did not see what is going to happen once these vaccines are coming in. What's happening once people start going back outside, right? When people start going back into the offices, right? So if you were in this situation and you had to ramp up real quickly, instead of hiring all these people, right? Why didn't we do term? Why didn't we look at gig resources? Why didn't we bring in more subcontractors, right? That could mitigate some of the risk and limit or lower your FTE to contractor ratio. So I think that for me, it's scenario-based planning is a requirement if you're going to be a sustainable organization, because change is inevitable, right? You have to plan for change. And if you don't, then you're a dead company.
Right. It's really hard to accept though. I was in a room with some extremely smart people. It wasn't these three, it was other extremely smart people. And warning them, I asked them what's going to happen when this economy turns, because we were in the heat of everything heating up because of that demand from the pandemic. What happens when things start to turn? And everybody in that room, maybe except one, thought that their organization was the exception, that it wasn't going to change. And
Right.
it changed for just about all of them. There's a terminology, the bullwhip effect, when you talk about supply chain. As it comes down the chain, it's like reacting. When you react at this level, it's now too late. So it's already coming down the chain. So you're already sending the stuff through manufacturing. You've already added all the people to your warehousing. But then the economy takes a turn and the demand drops. And now what? Now you're stuck with all of these resources. And sometimes the only thing you can do is cut hours, lay people off. Um, there, there's not a lot that you can do at that point.
Well, I think the question started with, what happens when the economy turns, right? Now you're dealing with people who are faced with the decision that they may have made the wrong decision, right? And so now you have leaders that maybe fear the impact of their decision. And so they have been placed into situations where they feel like they have to just kind of continue forward state, and they have to kind of commit to the decisions that they made, right? And that's why I say when it comes to change, you're dealing with a lot of the human behaviors, right? That fear of being wrong, or some of the insecurities. That's some of your biggest barriers to being able to shift and move in a different direction. Right? Even when people admit when they're wrong, it has to be like on this podium where I admitted where I'm wrong. I am wrong and I made the wrong decision. And it's this big thing, right? And in actuality, it's really difficult to have people in a room that are supposed to be the steady state, or the person that knows where they're
Mm-hmm.
going, and they have no idea where they're going. That's scary.
Yeah.
It's very scary.
Mm-hmm. And this is where Shannel and Deborah, you both tend to talk about scenario planning, and organizations that know that there's a layoff coming, they're going to be planning with their board, with their stakeholders, exactly how to go about this. Do we tell people the second that they're getting laid off? Do we give them 2 weeks of runway? What are we offering them as they walk out the door? Very few organizations are putting the same effort into scenario planning with, all right, here's who we'll have left.
What
Here's what their
happens
workload
with
will be like. What is going to be the impact on them? Deborah, what are your thoughts?
Well, I just think that I just I just go back to what David commented when we were talking offline about layoff survivor syndrome. So we just have to really understand, first of all, as the people making these decisions, that there's going to be an impact within the organization as well. Like that has to be first and foremost. Okay, what will that impact be? Well, it will also depend on how you manage the layoffs, because inevitably, I saw this quote that I loved. It pays to remember that staff cohesiveness is based on relationship, and the treatment of one employee reverberates to others. And so I love that quote because it's true. It's okay. So I saw that my colleague right here, I have breakfast with her, or I have coffee with her in the mornings, and we talk shop, but we talk about our families. I know this person, right? So how you treat her is going to have an incredible impact on me. And she will tell me, she will call me afterwards and she will tell me everything that you said, everything that you offered, and she'll have a conclusion as to you did it right or you did it wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and as Shannel said, like right is relative, but there are better ways to do it, and the perception of the employee is going to be really important. So I just think that in that scenario planning, that you have to include the perception of the people that leave, and how they're going to communicate with the people that stay, and how that's going to make them feel. Because and David, if maybe you can talk more about this, but the layoff survivor syndrome has a lot of those emotions that Shannel was just saying: anxiety, fear, guilt. I'm the one that stayed. Why did I stay? But am I going to stay for long, or am I going to stay for just a little bit and this will happen
Mm-hmm.
all over again? So those are a lot of thoughts. What do you guys think?
Yeah, and a big one, distrust, right? I always say
Yeah.
that trust is the most valuable commodity that a leader has within an organization.
That's right.
And so if they can't trust you, then game over.
Yeah.
And so then they're going to leave. And so transparency is huge. But,
Huge.
you know,
Hot
I've dealt with this with
hot take.
clients with like hot take. Oh my God, that's so not hot take. So so transparency is everything, right? And so I've dealt with this with clients going through mergers and acquisitions where they keep it so tight to their chest.
That's
By
right.
the time they announce it, everybody already knows, and there's already chaos. I know I have somebody that's close to me that was part of one of these big layoffs that just happened. They were laid off. They had told me about a month beforehand, I think I'm going to be laid off, but nobody told them that. The word wasn't officially out yet. So, so where does that transparency come into play? What is it safe to tell your people? Britni, you work a lot with the values aspect of all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that transparency work for both the organization and for the individuals who are going to be laid off?
Where the employees are going to feel the transparency is their direct supervisor. The organization as a whole needs to act on the values that it says that it has, and that matters. Whether they are speaking and acting in align with the values that they have. But the direct supervisor, no matter how big the layoff is, if the whole team has to go, or if it's one person on a team of 5 that has to be let go, how that's going to be experienced by the entire team, not just the person that's leaving, is absolutely going to have to do with that supervisor. And if that supervisor is acting out of sync with the messages that the people and the executives at the top are doing, or if they're acting out of sync with the values, it's going to be felt by the entire team. And it's like when you push down that button on what is it, the Boggle game, and all the cubes pop up, like that's going to be happening psychologically. And as everybody settles back down, whether or not they're going to be in the right place to be able to push harder, fill in the work that that person was doing, all comes down to that experience with the direct supervisor.
Well, and I think that organizations, and this comes from the top, right? Like, let's stop acting like our employees don't keep a pulse on the news, that they don't aren't well informed, that they don't experience or have a level of critical thinking, right? Like let's ensure that we are bringing our employees along. And there is an element of, do you tell or do you not, right? How much do you tell? But when you go dark, when you go silent, and you then just kind of have this your selected few, that's the first mistake. I think that you have to bring the organization along. You have to have hard conversations. You have to train your middle management, your supervisors, or whomever prior to this, to be able to handle difficult conversations. Right. The worst thing you can do is wait until you have to lay off to then give a script to a supervisor to talk to their employees. And I've seen that happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's now you are expecting the people to go out here and have real human conversations with humans, about people that they have worked with. To your point, Deborah, they also have gone out to lunch. They also have created
Mhm.
these bonds, right? They are also people. And so that is the mistake of, and I hate to say it, not planning for this and not being prepared for a change like this in your organization.
But
I find it irresponsible.
but
Yeah, I worked.
is sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no. I worked in an organization where they did layoffs horribly. They actually set they had the director lay off her people and then turned around and laid her off.
Oh.
Like when I tell you it was gut to the day, I still get goosebumps and in my chest, right? And it didn't even happen to me that time, right? The fact that I have been through a layoff myself, during the housing crisis where people were impacted, and my boss came to me and I was like, "No, I'm not going in that room. Nope, not
Hmm.
going in that room. You gonna lay me off? You gonna lay me off right here in front of everybody? we gonna be on the floor and do this, right?" People are so emotional during that time, right? So how do you help people get through this as an organization? And it starts with the CEO. It starts at that executive suite.
But
Okay, I think it's time to talk about the crying CEOs. All right.
but
Having to lay off employees is terrible and gut-wrenching. And most CEOs do care about their newest employee, about the employee that's been with them for 20 years that they have to let go. And they know it's not the employee's fault. It's not that that employee wasn't worth it, it's that they have to lay him off.
Mhm.
Is it better or is it worse to go on social media or in the announcement be sobbing?
So I have had to lay people off, and I got choked up,
Yeah,
right?
that
And
it's
there's
a
a there's
normal
a
human emotion.
correct. Now was I in here like boo-hooing, right? And couldn't get my words together? That's totally different. I absolutely, and not only did I cry or get emotional during the actual session of laying people off, but then having to communicate that to my team, hearing the impacts that they had, sitting down and working with each individual to kind of understand how they were feeling at that time, and then having to go to my boss and give them a readout of how people are feeling, right, was completely emotional, right? And I think that for us to say people shouldn't have feelings during this and that they are stone cold, now they're the CEO or they're the leader that doesn't care, right? But if you in here sobbing and boohooing, then you got too many emotions, right? And so I think that it's not having this constraint on how people handle hard things, because this is
Right.
this is hard, and
Mhm.
and how we show up for each other and support each other through this is what kind of truly matters to me.
But I think we know authenticity. Are you ready for a hot take? If you're
Okay.
crying on LinkedIn, it's not authentic.
Oh
Pop the
yeah.
mic.
Oh.
No, if you're crying on camera about laying people off, it's not authentic to me. If you're crying in a one-on-one meeting or even a team meeting and it's an intimate moment in an intimate space, that can be authentic with the people who know how authentic you might be. But as soon as you go and broadcast it, feels really yucky to me.
Well, I
But
also okay, continue.
sorry, we have this comment here. There has to be a level of being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Hiring the best of the best, then not expecting these very smart individuals not to be able to read the room is bizarre. Employees will suspect this, so the transparency is needed. Counterpoint, when you're transparent, who's going to be able to find a new job real quick because they don't want to continue working in the uncertainty of what's going to happen in this transition? Your best employees, the best of the best. So you might lose them either way. But here's another comment: authenticity matters, crying or not. I would say a sincere conversation is what makes the difference. Thank you, Nico.
Yeah.
I also, I wanted to say that it also this we have to see this in context of the culture of each organization, right? So if it is a very down to earth culture where people interact a lot and people have like a high level of high touch activity, and you show these emotions for other things as well during the like during just the day to day, like it would make a lot of sense for the CEO to have that reaction. And again, I agree with David, where don't do it on camera. You can do it with your people. It be as transparent and as authentic as possible. But I also think if there is a culture in the organization where it is cold, is it is a colder organization. You don't see that high touch. It varies by industry as well. Like, I just think the reactions of the people in the organization will
Mhm.
have to be read in context with the culture of the organization.
Mm.
Not to
Yeah.
say that people are not people, I agree, but
Mhm.
it's just we have to really measure the culture and see it through the lens of each company culture.
Look at Chanel's face. She clearly has cried on camera before. She's getting mad at us for saying this.
Look, I ain't got no problem with crying. I ain't. That is seriously. Tears are unique to individuals, right? I agree with you. I think that there's an element of culture that goes into it, but I think that especially if your culture is steeped in authenticity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to align it to that. And I think that um, regardless of whether you're IBM or a small mom and pop, right? Like authenticity matters, especially when you're trying to keep the best of the best.
Yeah.
So I really think that for me, it's the conversation, it's the training. To be honest with you, I know that's really cold, but it is the training to be able to help people get through hard things, and then you let them layer that on with who they truly are,
Yeah.
and how they show up for the people that they support.
I
Here's
think
here's
it gets more specific than culture. Because there's subcultures in different departments, especially if you're a larger organization. It does need to reflect the culture, but it has to reflect the actual values, previous actions, previous messages of that
Yes,
leader.
that's
If
Yes.
true.
I lay you off, I'm not going to cry in front of you, but you will probably get a letter from me, like a personalized handwritten letter, because that's how I communicate when I'm very emotional.
Mhm.
So I think the authenticity piece is
Correct.
to the leader. And some leaders sobbing on LinkedIn, that might just be their MO. And that's not the first or even the 10th video of them sobbing on LinkedIn. This one just happens to be a layoff.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to consider, do people outside the organization have any idea what this leader is actually like and how's it coming across?
Yes.
I
Here
love this.
is a
I
hot
love
take, my
this.
friend. Chris Yates here. If a doctor told you that you had some terminal disease and started crying about how sad they were, we would all recognize that as being wildly inappropriate. Layoffs should be treated by managers with the same level of understanding and grace as we teach and expect from doctors.
I don't think
Mic
that's a hot
drop
take.
moment.
I
I don't.
don't think
So,
that's a
so
mic
can I
drop.
just
I
say
don't
one thing
agree.
really quickly? So, having come from a situation where, and Chris, I hear you, homie. Thank you for sharing. Right, but I think that having had bad news given to myself, the person that gave that to me, that medical professional, broke down giving it to me. Right, and I did not think that that was wildly inappropriate. Right, like because the way that I responded to the news, that it she had all the training in the world, right? Like she was sitting there, she was like, "Hey, I hate to inform you, blah 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 blah," and I was like, "What?" Like I of course, because I'm getting this horrible news, and she broke down, and she held me, and like it was a level of just empathy that I appreciated, and support and authenticity that I expected in that not expected but appreciated in that moment, right? So again, I think it's the person. I think it's the person. I think it's the culture. I think it's the leader. I think that all of those things are taken into consideration. And I honestly probably when I was going through like telling people that people had to be let go, I showed up differently for that individual.
Mhm.
Right? I met them where they are based off of the relationship that I have with them. Right? So it was absolutely a situation where I leaned into certain pieces differently by person. So I respect Chris's comment 100%, but I think it's up to the person that's standing in front of you.
What
And
I what I appreciate though is the analogy is really good for us to talk about something that Chanel also brought up before. So the analogy of a doctor giving you bad news versus your supervisor or your manager giving you the same bad news, right? I just like the analogy of the doctor gets training on bedside manner, right? And so I don't think that a lot of managers, and
They
I
should.
know that a lot of managers and supervisors are in their positions because they're great at what they do, like they can that output the result, they're great at what they do, but they don't necessarily have that bedside manner, right? That those soft skills that I hate the term soft skill, but how do you relate to others? How do you lead? How do you mentor? How do you coach? How do you meet them where they are, as Shannel was saying? And I do think, back to what Shannel was saying before, is giving your people the tools to be able to handle difficult conversations. Not even in the layoff scenario. The layoff is just like one example of the really hard conversations you're going to have as a manager. So how are we giving our managers, our supervisors, the tools that they need to tackle layoffs, but also to tackle all the other difficult conversations that they're going to have in their career? I
That's
think
a whole
that
nother podcast.
Yes,
That's
it is.
that's a whole other podcast.
that's a
Girl,
good
don't
Mark
get
one.
me
that
on
down.
my
See you
soapbox.
next month for that. But
Yeah,
the
I don't want to
yeah,
dogpile
Brit-
on Chris because I get the analogy, but my
I am
doctor's a
with you,
service
Chris. I
provider.
am with you.
Yeah, my doctor's a service provider. My manager's not a service provider. I spend more time with my manager than I do with my spouse. It's not
Right.
different. They're not providing
But
a service. They're part of my life.
so yes, don't whether you think crying is appropriate or not, toxic positivity would certainly not be
Mhm.
appropriate. We know that
No.
with layoff survivor sickness, what helps with that partially is emotional support. We need to
And
give people the
validating.
time and the space to grieve. And we
Yes.
can grieve with them, yes. Shannel, your doctor holding you in that moment and crying with you in that moment would be very different than if you found yourself rubbing your doctor's back, telling them it's gonna be okay. You know what I mean?
Good point.
There's
Good point.
nuance to this, right?
Yes.
There is
Um,
nuances.
but
There are
certainly,
nuances.
oftentimes you see managers who now they feel like they're in a bad guy position, they're in a
Yeah.
no-win position, and they're being seen as, now I don't trust you. Now you're the opposition. You're the one who just fired Mary and Sean, and so that's how you feel people are looking at you, and so it's easy to say, well, we gotta move on. We gotta get this going and tell people everything will be okay. And what that I think is truly toxic. We need to give
Yeah,
space.
absolutely. And that's why you approach it from a standpoint of dealing with them on an individual basis, but then as a leader, saying how do we move together? Right? What are some of the challenges that we're facing right now, like as a team? Because you understand kind of what people are dealing with on an individual basis, and you know that they are tied or connected in some way, right? There are similarities in that, whether people are pissed, whether people are anxious, whether people are stressed. How do you have that conversation with a team? And that's actually what I did, right? Like I kept a pulse on the team. I brought the team back together, right? It was never the same. Now it's a new normal. So if you think that you're going to go back to a same culture, a same environment, no, like don't try to get back to being the same. How do we now create this new normal? And how do we operate in this new normal to be able to be productive while keeping a pulse on the individual places that people are in their grief process?
Right, because not all of this is altruistic. We like to think we're all crying for our coworkers that we ate lunch with,
No,
but we're also crying because burnout is real,
it's real.
and you better believe the organization is going to expect us to continue producing the way we've been producing
Or
after
even more.
15,000 people were just laid off.
Yeah.
Unless they're
Even more.
completely eliminating, sometimes they'll completely eliminate a department or something like that, or a team, but a lot of that grieving is for ourselves and the uncertainty that comes with, what am I supposed to do with this now? And the managers who are left behind, who are already middle managers, are suffering from greater levels of burnout than anyone else within your organization. Now they have to manage smaller teams and now demotivated teams, and somehow continue to be effective. How do you do that?
Just because you eliminated a department doesn't mean that people within that organization still doesn't operate like that department exists, right? Like you as an organization made the decision to eliminate this function, but did not help the organization understand how that change impacts them, right? And that's a process. So if I know that this area is a part of my process, then what I'm going to do, I'm be like, okay, especially if I'm going through grief, if I'm going through, oh my gosh, that guilt of still being around. Now I feel like I have to do this job and my job in order to get whatever that needs to be produced to the client or the customer, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like when you decide to eliminate 15,000 people or 1,000 people or 100 people, then the leadership has a responsibility to communicate to the organization and help the organization walk through what that looks like now that that function is gone. And in certain cases, some people has to say, you don't have to do that. Let that drop. Like, let that drop. You don't have to do that anymore. But that's individual by individual. That is department by department. That is business unit by business unit. And so, especially when you having layoffs and you don't have, and I hate to tout myself, but a change management professional to help you walk through this, you now deal with, Deborah, what you were focusing on was, that layoffs guilt, like that layoff survivor syndrome, right? Where you're sitting there and you got people who don't know, they in here like, what do I do with my hands? I have no idea how to move forward.
Right.
So that's
I just want to be fair to Chris real quick, because he did come back and he said, that's completely fair, Shannel. I'm much more concerned about the leaders engaging in performative grief and making it about the person doing the layoff. If they can make that condolence about the patient, then by all means, they should feel that authentically.
So just a true story. I know Chris. Chris is awesome. So I know Chris. Chris is awesome. Like, thank you for circling back, Chris. Like, trust me. It's a debate.
We have about 10 minutes left before we need to wrap up. So I want to make sure we get to at least one more viewer question. They asked if we will be discussing the layoff topic for specific states in the U.S. or only keeping it general. Specific states in other countries have different requirements on communications, timing, length of layoffs, and severance, etc. So talking about the nuts and the bolts, the logistics of layoffs.
Yes, layoffs suck in Maryland. I'll say that. Anybody else want to speak for their state?
My organization functions in the DC area and the greater Chicagoland area, Fort Wayne. And I would say, yep, it's rough, no matter whether you have an organization of 200 and you're doing a 50% layoff, or if you're in an enterprise scale organization and are doing a 12% layoff. It is hard all the way around for those leaders.
Now, Deborah, you're in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I'm in Puerto Rico, and I was saying before that it's just the conversation seems more geared towards we can't find employees. Like where are employees? We don't know where to find them. So that's kind of like the biggest challenge right now. But I think it was 1 year ago where we had a huge layoff for the power company in Puerto Rico. Is just one power company, and so it's unionized. And how much harder the layoffs were because of the union is like something that I can say, but that's a topic for another day. But unions definitely have a bigger say on some things, and they can be more affected on other things. So that's just something to consider. That's kind of my 2 cents from Puerto Rico. But yeah, layoffs suck anyway. So
I got a question.
Absolutely.
So when we're coming with when we're talking about layoffs, and of course I think that it's should be a part of a layoff package, right? You should have some type of 3-6 months of severance. But when we talk about this kind of, you will be laid off May the 31st, right? How do you keep that employee or those employees engaged, right? Like how do you ensure that those employees are not taking that level of grief and bringing it into the organization and not even tainting the waters, but you have people that are commiserating and maybe decrease in productivity. So where is the balance there?
I think you can do the same amount of damage whether you are telling them a minute before they're laid off or if you're telling them 2 months before they're laid off. People want to end well. Right now I'm seeing a lot of executives who are retiring. It's really important for them to end well. They don't want to get hard news that they can do nothing about. But I think all of us have an element of that. We want to believe that the work that we did was valuable, even though it's psychologically hard and we're resisting the urge to believe that we weren't good enough and that's why we were the one laid off. We want to believe that our work will continue, giving them the opportunity to hand off their work well to someone else, working with them the entire way. So whatever you're offering them, whether it's some kind of package, um, like months of pay, or you're helping them get landed in the next job, not just telling them and then letting them sit on their team by themselves with no communication from anyone about what's happening. It's getting closer and closer. That can really help. And keeping them included in everything until the last day. They can still have great input on something that's going to happen or start 6 months from now. And
Mm-hmm.
not just telling them they're still valuable, but showing them. Let them participate.
Yeah.
That's how you can keep them engaged all the way through their last day. And maybe get them back as a boomerang when you need them in 6 months again.
Mhm.
David, Deborah.
Yeah,
I have to agree with Brittany. If you include them in, just have them participate. Like, it's not like you're being laid off in 2 months and you're no longer valuable for this organization. No, you are really valuable, starting with that. But also allowing them to participate in any future planning, just giving their 2 cents, right? And I think the piece of, can you train someone to do part of what you did? Or can you, figure out a way to make this process more agile so that we can better, restructure once the layoffs occur? Because as you were saying before, I think it's really important to say, so what happens next? We lay off all of these employees, but what happens to all these functions? What happens to all this communication, or the way that the processes work? So let's rethink the processes before, the people leave, right? So I think that's one huge task that you can assign the people who are going to transition. And calling it a transition might even be better than just calling it a layoff, because hopefully they'll end up somewhere where they are also going to be able to continue with their impact in the industry, or, in the clients' lives.
right. And I think it needs to start way before the layoffs, but excellent employers should be focused on the growth and development of their employees and the career development of their employees, whether within your organization or not. I once worked with this organization that fed into a large organization. I think it was like their only client, or their only significant client, was
Mm.
this larger organization that they were a contractor for. And they complained to me that their people kept leaving them and going to work for this large organization. And I said, what's the issue with that? Start the contract early, that they understand that you're going to teach them everything you know. If they figure out and word gets out there that you are a feeder company into this other really impressive large organization, people will want to work for you and to be primed and trained up because you're so attractive to this larger company. And then what? You're going to have all of your alumni, if you will, like working for that larger company. You're never going
Mm-hmm.
to lose your contract. They're going to be there, feeling loyalty toward you. So if all of that starts well before the layoffs, then the layoffs being this unfortunate part of their journey, the greater journey is still helping them with this transition, helping make those connections, helping them find their next job, where maybe 60% of the focus becomes on them and 40% becomes on them wrapping things up for their job.
Yeah, I think that it's important for us, and I know we're short on time, but I think it's important for organizations to help them find their new job. I disagree with pretty much all of you all in regards to keeping people on after you're telling them that they're going to be laid off. I think, ideally it's a great idea. But when you're in an organization and you're asking them now for their intellectual property, their ideas on how to make this organization great, on, strategic planning and how to prepare for the future, it's like, so why am I being laid off? If I'm this critical and this valuable, then why are you
Mm-hmm.
laying me off? Like, what is the true need here? And so I think that in a lot of cases, people may very well take the 6 month severance versus working for the company for 2 months and then taking 4 months severance, right? Because they have their own grief they have to move through, to be able to then prepare themselves for their next chapter and their next journey, which I think the organization should help them with. But it's just, it puts them in a situation that's awkward. It puts the organization in a situation that's awkward. And if the company does what they're supposed to do to plan and prepare and provide transparent communications about what's going on, to provide that those people that are getting laid off the why, then I think that when it does happen and then they are putting services to help them find their new path, I think that's the most opportune way to go.
Yeah, and maybe.
So you wouldn't keep them on for a bit. So you would just tell them today, and then I'll see you tomorrow.
Shannel is handing out cardboard boxes at the door. But it depends on the position. If it's strategic planning that they're part of, also if they're involved in planning this year's holiday party that they won't be there for, then yeah, they shouldn't stick around and do that. It depends what they're doing for the organization, I think. What their position is.
If they're doing payroll, doing payroll, I will keep them on for 2 months. But if they're a part of the holiday party, then I'm letting them go tomorrow.
Yeah, but if they're doing payroll, make sure they're bonded. We would love for you, especially for those of you who found it difficult finding us today with this live stream, we need to hit a critical mass of 150 followers on our the Work Culture Debates page. So we would love for you to follow us there. That's our selfish ask. For you, we promise that we will continue to bring you really great topics like this one, really interesting ideas, and hopefully some things that you can run with within your organization into the future. So follow us on the Work Culture Debate, and you'll know next time we're going live and all the other things that we drop between now and then. But we go live every third
Monday of the month.
So we will see you then. Also, let us know. We want you to. I wasn't trying to wrap the whole thing up, but now I'm like.
It sounds like you're wrapping the thing up.
I know. I'm not trying. Also, though, let me get this in. Please send us a messages or an email, or we have that form that you can fill out with ideas for future topics that you'd like to see us cover, as well as specific questions you may have. And we can also continue the conversation on layoffs for now before until we move on to that next topic that we'll be announcing within the next couple weeks. So I was not moving us on. So
we got 3 minutes.
Yeah.
3 minutes. So
we should all say our goodbye and final thoughts, I think.
All right. Shannel, you want to kick us off, and then we'll go all the way around and end with Deborah?
Meanwhile, I'm like, what is the final thought? I think that to be honest with you, and I love Lisa's comment about the EAP. I think that it's an organization's responsibility to plan for the future. I think that it's an organization's responsibility to provide the right resources to help people move through changes. And I think that it's the organization's responsibility to be, and I hate to use the cliche term, empathetic when they have to make those hard decisions. And so I feel like if organizations do not take these steps, then they will be irrelevant.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I think the experience oftentimes comes down to the direct manager or supervisor of the person that's being laid off. So like Shannel said earlier, making sure that those people are trained on how to do this, and that we're not asking them to function outside of who they are, that their values and their previous behaviors and messages can remain the same, and that they can be supportive to this employee the same way they've been supportive to them in the days before the layoff.
The direct impact of the layoff, I think, maybe you move on from that a couple weeks or a couple months after those people are out of your building, but you will continue to be impacted based on the choices that you make during this critical time. The people who survived the layoff they're going to have long memories about this, and so it is imperative to do this with the utmost respect, the utmost poise. And while you can't be the good guy you can be the better guy. You can make the choices and lay people off in a way that shows empathy and respect. And that starts with and ends up with building trust through transparency.
So I think that just really learning from what's going on currently, just looking at the media, seeing what has been done right and what has not been done right, and just learning from that, I think is really valuable. Just if you're a CEO, if you are an executive, and you're contemplating layoffs, just inform yourself with what's going on right now. Make sure that you understand what's going on in your company and how your company culture has gone through similar crisis points, because all organizations have crisis points. Just be mindful of your people, be mindful of your culture, stay aligned with it, but ultimately be transparent and be authentic.
Excellent. And you can follow all of us, please do, right here. You can hover your phone over our QR codes, and that center QR code will take you to our page. So connect with us. Let's continue the conversation.
Yes, agreed.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Good
Bye.
afternoon.